should we consider nuclear energy? Well, I've talked quite a bit about this before, and I've highlighted that it can be good to keep an open mind to all technologies and assess them on their merits. However, not everyone agrees, and in particular, some people simply don't want to consider nuclear at all. These would include, for example, the Greens, but also the son of Australia's first billionaire, Simon Holmes. He had bankrolled the Teal independence, and he had founded that Climate 200 group. He doesn't appear to agree that it is necessarily worth considering nuclear power, at least according to some reporting from John Kehoe in the AFR. The AFR reports that Engineers Australia, which represents itself as a peak engineering body, was to host a panel session entitled Avoiding an NG Blunder Down Under. The presenter of this panel session was to be Robert Parker. Now, he believes that climate change is real and wants to do something about global warming. His Twitter bio states that he is, quote, passionate about stopping global warming and bringing back a price on carbon. He is hardly a climate change denier, so to speak, and seemingly would seem to have some similar views to Simon Holmes generally, except it appears on the technology to use to tackle climate change. Now, Robert Parker's talk was to discuss the benefits of nuclear power. Robert Parker certainly seems to prefer nuclear power to simply using renewables, at least judging from the topics he was to discuss and the organizations that he is affiliated with. For example, the talk was to discuss topics such as reported by the United Nations Economic Commissions for Europe, nuclear energy has the lowest carbon emissions of any generating source, and behind small hydro has the second lowest overall environmental impact. Furthermore, variable renewable energy, such as wind and solar generation, has a poor track record in achieving deep carbon emissions reductions. And it continues on. In essence, his talk was designed to look at which technology would lead to the greatest carbon reductions. The one might dispute whether or not nuclear is that technology, but you would think you would want to hear this, especially in an environment full of engineers who could potentially call him out and challenge him if he is simply wrong. It would seemingly be the perfect environment to hear such a talk, a perfect environment where if he is incorrect, someone will be there to correct him. However, Simon Holmes was seemingly in no mood to listen to such a talk, and he tweeted his displeasure, stating, seriously, Engineers Australia, you're hosting an anti-renewables event for Nuke for Climate. I would have thought your body was dedicated to improving understanding, not muddying the waters. Now, that is to some extent correct in that they were going to be hosting an event for Nuclear for Climate, and furthermore, it was not exactly a pro-renewables event, it was more of a pro-nuclear event. However, it's not necessarily clear that this was going to be anti-renewables so much as pro-nuclear, but perhaps we are splitting hairs there. In any case, Simon Holmes was not pleased about this event going ahead. Now, of course, we need to know that Simon Holmes had, like I said, bankrolled Climate 200, which brought in the Teal independence. Furthermore, Simon Holmes has financial interests in several renewables-related organizations. For example, Decarb Ventures, an organization he set up to invest in things along the lines of decarbonization. So certainly one can see a financial interest in promoting renewables on the behalf of Simon Holmes, something that's been reported rather frequently in certain parts of the media, such as in The Australian or the AFR. Now, of course, that's not to necessarily say that Simon Holmes is wrong. After all, one might argue that he's putting his money where his mouth is. He might seriously believe that renewables are the best way to tackle climate change, or they are the path forward to cheaper, cleaner, and better energy generation. And he might believe this, and therefore is investing accordingly. One can cast this in two different ways. In any case, it appears that Engineers Australia immediately capitulated to Simon Holmes' displeasure, and they pulled the session. They tweeted that the session, quote, does not meet their guidelines, and they are investigating how it was scheduled. However, they also informed potential attendees that the session was cancelled due to sickness, which the presenter subsequently denied. Engineers Australia then backtracked, stating, quote, in response to an email stating the speaker was unwell, there were human errors on our part. An incorrect event cancellation message was inadvertently sent. That looks a little bit odd, to say the least. I will let you judge what you think about their response there. Now, Simon Holmes has denied having any role in cancelling the speech. He stated that he, quote, had absolutely no role in the decision to cancel the invitation, and any reporting otherwise was false. Now, to be clear, I actually believe Simon Holmes caught there. I do not think he picked up the phone to Engineers Australia and demanded the event be cancelled. I don't actually think he took any action other than tweeting and expressing his view, which anyone is entitled to do. He's expressing his view much like anyone else on Twitter or on X or any of the other social media platforms. Certainly, he is entitled to do that. However, because he has a reputation for assertive campaigning, it looks to me that Engineers Australia decided it would be easier to just placate Simon Holmes than to keep the event online and risk his ire. Simon Holmes didn't need to do anything for the event to disappear. Now, to be very clear, I'm not alleging any wrongdoing by Simon Holmes. He is entitled to express his displeasure at an event if he wants. All manner of people do this all the time, and Simon Holmes has free speech to be able to do this, and I don't begrudge him doing that. Rather, the issue is whether or not Engineers Australia really should have stood down in this manner. But that said, I can definitely see how an organisation might draw some inferences from a tweet that Simon Holmes sends. But of course, he did not say as such, and I'm sure that he would deny having any such implication if that were put to him. Now, Simon Holmes had accused Robert Parker of being an advocate, it appears, at least implicitly. And as far as I'm aware, there's no insinuation that Robert Parker has any financial interest, but certainly he is an advocate for nuclear power. By contrast, as I've indicated, Simon Holmes is a renewable investor. He's the founder of Climate 200, which raised money for the Teal candidates that successfully unseated various Liberal MPs in the 2022 federal election. For example, Simon Holmes also set up Decarb Ventures, which at the very least you can see might have some financial interest in going along with renewables. Though the AFR reports that there has been some backlash, but how great that backlash isn't exactly clear. For example, they quote Garth Hamilton of the LNP, but of course that's what you would expect to have a backlash from. For example, he's quoted as saying, "You have undermined the independence of Engineers Australia and demonstrated that people should simply give in. Engineers Australia has demonstrated in their approach to the Robert Parker event that they have completely abandoned the basic tenets underpinning engineering and science, particularly analysis and objectivity. As a former member of Engineers Australia, a member of Parliament, and an Australian, I am appalled that your organisation is seeking to silence a legitimate, scientific position that is supported around the world by the engineering profession. What message does this send to those Australians aspiring for a career in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics? Well, it tells them that if you do not adhere to the prevailing narrative of billionaires, then they are wrong. Their work should be disregarded, and they should be cancelled." Now, to be clear, Simon Holmes did not cancel the event, he simply tweeted his opinion, as is his right to do. Engineers Australia maybe should have taken a stronger stance and kept the event, and then let the comments from Robert Parker be challenged if they ultimately turned out to be wrong. And this would have been the perfect event for that to occur, because of an event with engineers who would have been informed to be able to challenge his views. But in any case, I'll let you judge this whole incident. I'm just reiterating what the AFR has said and what has been reported. Let me know your thoughts about this whole situation and whether or not the event should have been cancelled or whether the event should have gone ahead.